Welcome to Born to Win, and I am so excited to introduce you to this week's super interesting guest. Ikenna Onyebuchi is a law graduate. He's actually studying his third degree at the Imperial College of London in MSc Management, and he's also a author of a book called The Storm, and he's currently working on his second book called The Songs of the Prodigal Son. And by the way, he's only 21 years old. We had a super interesting conversation on all things relating to identity, masculinity, growing up in the UK after being born in Africa, and just a bunch of really big insights and gems from someone so young. I know you're going to enjoy it. So I am Winston Ben Clements, and this is Born to Win. Ikenna, thank you so much for taking the time to join me here today. And maybe I know we were chatting a little bit offline, but maybe a good place to start is, yeah, like a natural start would be how we met, maybe, because I believe the first time we met each other was through Talk Let's Do More, which is the mastermind that I run with Mayfair, my wife. But I actually believe you and Mayfair had met before that through the University of Exeter. So maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, hey Winston, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure. Yeah, it's an interesting one actually. I think the first time Mayfair and I met was in Exeter, but we didn't really know each other. And I think I reached out to her around the time I was self-publishing my first book. I think I reached out to her really weirdly because I got cold feet. So I finished the book and then decided, yeah, I don't think I want to publish anymore. And so I reached out to her because I think she had started a coaching program at that time.
Yeah.
And then she sort of coached me through being intentional, setting goals. And I think it was through working with her then that sort of she piqued an interest. And then she invited me to Talk Let's Do More, which is the first time I met you. And I think that session was very impactful for me. It was quite, I don't know, I think it pushed me out of my comfort zone a bit because I think I was at an interesting part of my life where I just graduated uni, trying to figure out what to do with my life. Also applying to jobs. And yeah, I think I was just going with the flow. And I think it was really that session that affirmed what I was doing anyway and trying to essentially got me to get on with it instead of procrastinate and overthink and stuff like that. And then through that session, I then joined the Talk Let's Do More cohort, the very first cohort, which is quite very impactful. Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
Which I met, yeah.
Nah, honestly, it was. And I guess things were a little bit different back then because I think when you came to the first PODM event, that was a live event, I believe. So this was like before COVID.
Yeah.
And so we could actually like see each other face to face, not like through a camera. So that was really cool. And and then I guess after that, by the time you joined, I think we had transitioned to doing it virtually.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the most part.
First session was live, and then the second, third, and fourth, kind of moved on to digital form. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Corona happened. Okay. And you said so one of the things that you go out of it was being pushed out of your comfort zone. And I think the other thing which and you can tell me if this was your experience, for a lot of people they said, the community aspect of it, of TODM, was pretty big for them. So I know there's, those the Slack group and people messaging each other and encouraging each other. Like, how did you find that aspect? Did you find that it helped you as well, being part of a community of people who are, quote unquote, like-minded? I know that word gets used a lot.
I think it was definitely a new experience for me, I think, because I'm not a loner per se, but I think I'm quite used to doing things on my own. even now, like I study on my own. I don't tend to share my goals a lot. I sort of say, like, journal, say what I want to say. I'm in my head a lot, but then I know my goals and I don't share them. But I think that was the first time being in a community where I was sort of not forced per se, but to get the best out of it, kind of like be amongst a community of people that essentially had pretty ambitious goals as well. And yeah, I was a bit nervous at first because, like I said, I would say I'm quite introverted, and I think that also kind of if you combine that and the fact that I work alone, it's an interesting combination. So it was very nerve-wracking because I was thinking to myself, are my goals too big? Or I felt a bit inadequate at first, which is why I link it to the being pushed out of my comfort zone. Because one thing I'd say about myself is I have big ambitions and big goals, but then I often question whether I'm a bit delusional. And so I think what TLDM did give me was that reassurance that I'm not delusional.
Or at least you're not the only delusional.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But not the only delusional one, I think one thing that struck me was the first time I heard you say about your mission to inspire, was it 1 billion people?
1 billion people, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, I'm like, madman. Yes, I'm in the right room.
Yeah, I remember sitting down and thinking, whoa. And I think that's what tends to stop me sometimes, because I think being educated, my low education sort of taught me to be critical. And even before that, I studied history and theology. So I question things a lot. So what tends to happen is I have this big goal and I criticize and overthink every possible way it could go wrong to try and plan against that happening. So I end up sort of, essentially criticizing myself so much that I almost think, okay, I don't have the skills to do it. And so I end up not doing it. So I think being in a group like that focused more on action and gave me less time to think, which is why I say the first time I met Mayfair, I had written the book. I set out to write a book because it's something I always wanted to do, big goal. Wrote the book, and then last minute thought to myself, every possible thing that could go wrong. And so that's what I mean, but I needed that push a little bit. And I think, TLDM did definitely give me that. And I think as I grow now, I'm learning that there are certain times you do need to share your goals, and there are certain times, I suppose you need to sort of just get on with it. Don't overthink it, don't do it, and learn as you go along, essentially.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think I can relate to you on many different things that you mentioned there. So even though I'm a speaker and I'm always like presenting, on a stage or nowadays virtually, I actually do consider myself to be quite a big introvert.
Yeah.
I'll say to people, and they're like, no, you're not. You're lying. No, I actually am. And so for me, it actually takes a lot of energy. Like, I'll do a talk and I'll literally like need 2 days to recover before I do the next talk. Like, because I recharge best in basically my own company, like alone. And yeah, exactly. And you might relate to that as well. And then so when it comes to, because people always talk about this community thing, having, I think there's even like lots of personal development quotes around it, like, you're basically the average or the best of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. I'm sure you've heard something along them lines, which I think I agree and disagree with, because some people are more able to be self-starters than others, but I think community always helps. So the way I like to see it is almost like having a extra layer of accountability. So it sounds like what you're saying is that you are pretty good at holding yourself accountable to your goals.
Yeah.
But like that community aspect kind of forced you to go that step further and maybe you probably would have still published the book, albeit like you'd have delayed it or overthunk it for like another 6 months. So
Yeah.
adding that layer of community, which in your case initially was talking to Mayfair, getting some coaching from Mayfair, and then after that joining the mastermind, probably like brought that goal forward for you, instead of
Yeah.
it being, I'm going to launch in 6 months.
Mhm.
Actually, I'm ready to launch next month or whatever. I don't know
Yeah.
if you agree with that or what your view of that is.
I mean, I definitely agree with it. I think um, that quote, you're the average of the 5 people you spend time with. That's something I've been pondering on for the past couple of weeks. And I
You're
think
like, I'm always alone. So
yeah,
how does that
yeah,
work?
yeah, yeah. I say that because I started to evaluate my friendship groups, and that's the thing, right? I think when I look at my life, I've never really been that guy in a clique. Like I easily sort of slip in and slip out. Like, like I can sort of be likable to people and warm up to people and get people to warm up to me, but I don't normally move around in groups. So I think that quote always rubbed me a bit wrong because I always felt to myself, so are you telling me that I have no chance? and
I
and
have
I
no future.
yeah, and I definitely agree with you because it's a tricky one because I use the gym as an example. Like, so at uni, even now, the gym is sort of my place where I go on my own, clear my head, be alone, reflect and everything, but also hit the gym, right? But I know a lot of people that go to the gym with people. And I think I was in a conversation with someone that said, yeah, how can you go to the gym alone? And for me, it was more, I think the way I tried to explain it was, I just feel like I'm a self starter, like you said. Like I can motivate myself. However, though, there was this one time I went to the gym with someone and I'd been lifting 80 bench. Yeah, it was basically bench press. I was lifting 85 kg, right? And I thought, okay, yeah, this is right. And I'd never really bothered to go above that because I just assumed like 85 kg is quite heavy. Like it's heavier than me. So I thought, okay, whatever. And then this guy, a friend of mine, he says, I'll challenge you to 100 kg. And I'm thinking, I've never done this before, so it's not going to happen. And he said, okay, try one rep, sorry. And so I said, cool. He went behind me to spot me. And to my very surprise, I benched 3 reps of 100 kg.
Whoa.
And that's how I started to then bench 100 kg. So I think being a self-starter and sort of navigating life on your own, I see the benefit of that because I think you always need that intrinsic motivation. And I think I have that as a person.
Yeah.
However, I have seen the benefits of doing things and essentially achieving goals as a community because it essentially gives you that one other person to hold you accountable and even to push you further. Because I think that's what some Mayfair said at the end of now TLDM graduation, should I say.
Yeah.
I think she said about me, she said she felt that I just needed to push myself a bit further out of my comfort. Because I think I can push myself to great lengths, but sometimes I kind of just stop because I then start to say, oh, this is a bit delusional. And then someone comes along and says, yeah, you can do it. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then I end up realizing that I can do more than I thought I could. So I do see, I wouldn't say it's clear cut. I wouldn't say, okay, if you don't have 5 people that are a bit, I wouldn't necessarily say, okay, yeah, like you're doomed. But at the same time, I do recognize the importance of having like-minded people on your team. I think it does push you that bit further and makes things much more just better in terms of like how far you can go. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And I think, maybe just to recap for people who are listening to this, I feel like it's almost like we're saying I guess we're saying, you could be a self-starter, you could be a person who is able to motivate themselves, but that will almost only get you so far. So you can achieve a lot as a self-starter. You can do a lot of big things, crush your goals, but it's almost like having that extra layer of accountability, like a community or, like that friend in the gym who challenges you
Yeah,
to lift, 100 kg. It then takes you from a place of thinking about achieving big goals to achieving crazy goals,
yeah,
right? Because like
yeah,
the community is what takes you from like big to crazy. So I feel, and by the way, for most people and most of the time, big goals are good enough. You don't have to go crazy all the time, right?
yeah,
But it's if you have that purpose, that calling, that mission, and you really want to change the world or do something, really, really big and crazy, then community is definitely something to explore in that instance.
mm.
I think is what we're saying.
Yeah. I think it's just to add another point to that. It's
Yeah.
interesting. I read a book called The Power. It's no, it's Quiet. Yeah, Quiet: The Power of Introverts by Susan Cain. And it was interesting to see in that book because she was saying that we live in a world where um, community is overemphasized, but that the real work gets done in solitude. And
Mm.
she used the example of Steve Wozniak, who built Apple with Steve Jobs.
Oh,
And she was saying that he's a massive introvert. I think he even wrote in his book how he got most of his work done in solitude and while he was in the quiet of his own presence. And so I think it's very important to distinguish when you need to
mm.
have that solitude. Personally, I'm someone that I can work in groups, but in terms of contributing my best to a group, I need that time in solitude. I need that time
Mm.
to sort of
Mm.
understand the content, get my head around it, and then understand it, and then propose solutions. I think I'm just that kind of person. So I think there is a balance to be
Yeah.
struck between working in a group and working by yourself.
Yeah, agreed. And I think sometimes that is my struggle with personal development, like when they say you are the average of the five people, it's almost like a blanket statement when actually each person has their own individual needs. Some people are able to maintain high performance in solitude and don't need as much community as others, and vice versa. For some people, they know they would not go to the gym if they didn't have a friend call them in the morning and say, let's go to the gym. So I guess it's about, just knowing what works for you at the end of the day and not feeling like you need to follow every quote on quotes.com.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's move on because I've got a couple more things here for you. So, if you have listened to this podcast, then you probably know that a lot of the time, we talk about, storytelling and I guess the big thing is around helping people to own their stories.
Mm.
And so I'm curious to hear from your perspective, Ikenna, what does owning your story mean to you?
That's a good question. Such an interesting one because I think I've come to terms with very different parts of my stories at very different random times. Because I tend to self-reflect a lot, I would say. And so like perhaps something happened to me or I went through something like 3 years ago and I'm only coming to terms with it emotionally or intellectually like 3 years after. And so
Mhm.
that's what I mean by I tend to, yeah, my story is almost always changing in some sense. But in terms of the basic sort of, okay, my story, I would say, okay, so originally born in Nigeria, moved to England, 11 years old, north of England, actually, in a Catholic Jesuit school in the remote villages of Hurst Green. Um, it was a nice time. It was interesting. I would say I achieved quite a bit as well. I think what Stonehurst College did for me was to bring out my potential, because I was a very reserved kid. I was quite shy, very insecure, I think because of that insecurity, I grew to find comfort in myself and by myself. So I think things like public speaking, for example, Stoney has pulled that out of me. I would probably not be doing a podcast back then. Probably not. So I was a shy kid, but then by 18 years old, when I eventually left, so I stayed there for around 7 years. I really did miss the place. I think it became my family, I would say. It was a nice time, from playing on the rugby team to becoming senior prefect and all of that. So I think I achieved things that I could really never achieve in Nigeria, because before coming to England, in Nigeria, my teachers in primary school just had no faith in me. Just because I think the educational system goes something like, if you're not that great at maths, if you're not that great at English, then if you're a bit slow in understanding things, then your future is doomed. And I was that person. So I got distracted incredibly easily. I wasn't that great at maths. My future didn't exactly look like sunshine and rainbows. So coming over to England, like I said before, was sort of a breath of fresh air. So fast forward, graduated from Stonehurst, and then I got into University of Exeter, which was my first choice to study law. Interestingly enough, I didn't want to do law at first. My interest was in philosophy, because back in the day, I enjoyed questioning God and why he exists.
That sounds like a whole separate podcast episode.
And different ethical arguments, abortion, euthanasia. Like, I enjoyed things like that. So law sort of just came about because my father asked me, why don't you try it? And I thought, cool, law it is. Plus, apparently, it makes you look smart if you study law. So I said, cool, whatever.
I'll take it.
So, started law. First year was all right. I think I did push myself quite a bit. So, and this is when I would say at university, I think I had an identity crisis. Because Stoneyhurst is a private British, very British institution. And my memories of Nigeria weren't positive. So I think there was a lot of running away. It was more, I see this new culture, this English culture, and I really want to embrace it. And I loved it. And so I grew to identify more as being English, even though I had only just moved. But by the end of the 7 years at Stoneyhurst, I grew to identify more as English. And so coming to the University of Exeter, which is known to be a very white university, I didn't really see a problem. I just thought, I'm coming from private school and this type of person, all this and all that. But in trying to do that, I did always see a conflict. So I met a lot of Black people in Exeter, but I almost didn't really know where I belonged. So on one hand, I felt like, I understand Nigerians, I understand Black people and all of that, like, because I did used to go home to Nigeria every now and then. So I understand to some certain extent, but I don't have many Nigerian friends. In fact, I didn't have many friends. And on the other hand, I was also becoming friends with my hallmates.
Yeah.
And I did very much relate to them as well. Private school educated, British, all of that. But one thing I did find was, on both scenarios, I felt like I wasn't being my full authentic self. So with my English friends, I felt like I had to dub down my more African side, even though I didn't want to identify in the first place. But with my Black friends and my African friends, I felt like I didn't necessarily always fit in, because at one point it was kind of like it was perceived that I was sort of like or this boy that doesn't want to identify with his Blackness, essentially. Right. So that didn't warm too well. So, so I made a deliberate decision to not join the African Caribbean Society, just because I was very, like I said, all I had of Nigeria was negative memories, a place that didn't really accept me. So to me, I couldn't really identify as being Black or African, you know what I mean? So interestingly enough, I think that, like I said, so in second year, it was a bit of an identity crisis, because in second year, what happened was I was racially attacked and then hospitalized. And so that happened. And I didn't really deal with it. But 3 years after, 2020, I was talking to a therapist about it. And what happened there was I realized that I came to the painful reality that regardless of my achievements and how much I didn't want my skin color to matter, there are just people out there that will just see me as a Black man. That's it. So, and I think in second year, when I was attacked, racially attacked, in my head, I think back then I thought, because I went to a private institution, I went to University of Exeter, I studied law, I studied all these top degrees, essentially. I came from a certain class and a certain background. I, for some reason, believed that it couldn't happen to me. So when it happened to me, I felt very, I don't know, I almost felt, it felt weird. It felt like a very strange thing to come to terms with. But anyways, fast forward, I eventually started to accept my more African side more. But even till today, I think every now and then I grapple with the, am I more British or am I more African? Am I more British or am I more African? And I can't necessarily say I'm more African, even though I'd like to, because I don't necessarily, I haven't lived in Nigeria consistently for like 11 years. At the same time, my values don't always quite, they don't always mesh nicely with the traditional values. And then on the other hand, I can't necessarily say that I'm completely British, because there's an African side of me that quite enjoys African culture. Do you know what I mean? And again, my values don't always neatly mesh. Because I think when you look at both sides, right, I think in the Western world, there's this strong individualism. And I like the fact that you can determine what you make of yourself. I resonate with that. That's how I live my life. In terms of, like you said, being a self-starter, motivating myself, holding myself accountable. But on the other hand, in the African culture, it's all about family.
Yeah.
And I've seen both sides be pushed to their extremes. So that's why I choose to sort of identify as sort of in the middle. So in terms of my story at university, that sort of, I would say it was a whole bowl of identity crisis. But at the same time, I learned a lot, because within uni, I pushed myself and I founded the first Exeter BAME Law initiative, which had never been done before, after the racism, the discriminatory practices and scandal that Exeter went through. So things like that pushed me out of my comfort zone. So I think I don't regret my university experience. I very much cherish it, but I will say that the whole identity crisis of it sort of led to me understanding myself better today. And following that, that's when I met you after graduation, did a couple of internships. That's pretty much it. Like I then did my law school, first master's, and now I'm doing my second master's. And in between that, before graduation, I then self-published a book, a part of the whole identity
yeah.
crisis bubble thing. At some point, I worked in Parliament. So I think I would say my life has been one big sort of, I've been stumbling along the way, but stumbling forward. I mean, I like to say I've been stumbling forward, because when people see me and say, seem like you have your stuff together, you know what you want in life. And I'm like, yeah, I know what I want in life, but most of the time I make plans and then they just don't go according to plan. So it's like, so I've come to sort of accept the whole you can plan. I'm a planner. You can plan as much as you want, but chances are they won't always go according to how you'd like them to go. Like I could never have seen myself doing a business degree right after a law degree, because I thought I would do a law master's in one of the top London schools.
Yeah,
got rejected from a bunch of them, and then ended up doing a master's somewhere else along with the legal practice course, and then I then reapplied to those same schools for a business degree, and then I got them. So, so it's just, I think I am very grateful for where I am now, because I have some knowledge of various industries and sectors, and some knowledge of myself, and I'm still learning. But yeah, I will say my life so far has been a very interesting journey. Just trying things, failing at things, trying more things, succeeding. So it's been up and down, but I think I do very much appreciate it.
You make me laugh when you talk about, oh, my life has been like up and down so far, like you're 85 years old. Looking back,
I'm only in my early 20s as well.
Exactly. You're literally what, 21, 22?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I guess that's a good sign. Like you're speaking almost from a place of having experienced a lot, which I believe with that, there's always an opportunity to gain wisdom through different experiences. And, even when plans don't particularly, and by the way, like, I feel like 80% of the plans that I make never actually unfold the way I write them down on paper.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Like I don't have the exact number, but I feel like it could be that high. Like, and so one of the things that I've, maybe because I'm a little bit older than you, but one of the things that I've come to appreciate is because I'm kind of like you as well. Like I like to have a plan, but at the same time, what I'm learning with age is just not to be attached to that plan. It's kind of like, yeah, it's there, but chances are, it's gonna go left in some way. So for sure. But I really love some of the things that you mentioned. So let me kind of say to you some of the things that I picked up. So I think definitely some of those key moments I can definitely relate to because similar to you, I was born in Africa and then moved to the UK. I think I was 12 or something. So not too different from your experience. And, I could definitely relate to that feeling because, and actually you're pretty much at a 50-50 place because you kind of had the first 11 years of your life in Nigeria and
Yeah.
then maybe the next 10, 11 in the UK. So you literally
Yeah.
had half a life in Africa and half a life in the UK.
Yeah.
And I remember in my early 20s, I had that feeling as well because, kind of like you, funny enough, I went to a mostly Asian school, so in West London. And so, a lot of my friends growing up were Asian, didn't really know many Black people except from the people that I lived with,
Yeah.
right? So that's like my mom and my sisters. And so, in a way, I had this identity crisis. So, like later on, when I was at uni, we'd go clubbing and I'd see like a group of like Black boys and Black girls having fun, and I'd be thinking, huh, feels like I should be there, but like it also feels so weird, like seeing that many Black people together. right? It feels almost like I should be, but at the same time, it feels really foreign. So I could definitely relate to that, almost like being torn about what your place should be, and then also from like a cultural perspective, like you say, it's so different, such a different mindset, growing up in, I guess, the West, whether it's the UK or the US, because I know there's a lot of international audience who listen to this as well. And then, that mindset versus the mindset of, back home, which is, I guess, more conservative, traditional, often religious. And so you find yourself again being stretched between two different ways of thinking and of being. So I could definitely relate to that as well. And I think I had heard about the situation that you mentioned when you got racially attacked at school in Exeter Uni. And so, I can only imagine how traumatic that is, especially when, like you say, you grew up in a village and probably all the people that you went to school with or your friends growing up, they were white people, right? And so to then be
Yeah.
by white people, it, I guess for me, let me speak for myself, it feel almost like a betrayal, even though I'm black and they're white, but it's like, but I thought we were together in this. And so, yeah, I can only imagine how difficult that must have been. And so how did you I know you mentioned you later on had conversations and you had therapy that helped you to kind of process that. But in the moment, because I guess there'll be people who are listening to this who may have experienced not necessarily racial, but another form even of discrimination, whether it's for gender, for disability, for age, whatever. Discrimination can unfold in so many different ways. And I feel like in that moment, it's very easy to become resentful, feel betrayed, like I was saying, okay, I thought we were one, but now you're attacking me. So how did you kind of manage to get through that that space without feeling like, oh my God, I need to carry this anger, I need to carry this grudge for the rest of my life, which can be, painful for many people.
So interestingly enough, right? So I think the good thing about my secondary school was there were a lot of white people there, but there were also a good enough number of black people and Nigerians. So I think I was never fully disconnected from
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria per se. I just preferred and felt like I resonated more with just the British way of doing things. I think to me, I just felt like it was calmer, more understanding. And it's understandable because Nigeria is a place where the people are incredibly resilient,
Yeah.
like great people. But because of the situation of the country, um, a lot of the time people can be impatient.
Yeah.
And so for someone, let's say for someone that's trying to find themselves, right? You grow up in an environment where everyone's kind of like, just get on with it. Do you know what I mean? So I think I warmed more to the Western way of doing things. But in terms of going forward and not being resentful, interestingly enough, right? So I was it wasn't actually a white person that attacked me. That's what sort of shocked me the most. It was the person was brown.
Okay.
And so I remember my friends and I joked about this. Well, obviously, this was before I properly processed it. Because before I was attacked, I remember saying to the person, like, hey, like, we're both minority ethnicities. Like, why are you doing this? So um, the way I dealt with that was interesting because I don't think I processed it. I didn't process it, if I'm being honest. I properly processed it after, like, 3 years after during the George Floyd protest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I processed it then because so two people were killed, and then it was George Floyd and um, was it Aubrey?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I know who you mean. Yeah, it was the The guy who got gunned down as he was jogging, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that triggered me because I could relate more to Aubrey because he was just running through the neighborhood, and that's something I do. I just jog, I explore every now and then. So I think his life felt very similar to mine.
Mm-hmm.
A normal guy from some form of privilege and just running through a neighborhood, right? Going along his day. And so that really triggered me. So at the time when I was stabbed, I wasn't resentful, actually. In fact, I felt like I didn't have any time to feel emotionally what I should have been feeling. So a lot of the time I joked about it. In fact, many friends told me to not do that because I think they felt I was trying to disguise it with humor. Whereas the actual truth is I just wasn't sure what I was meant to be feeling.
Yeah.
I think in my head I felt I'm at uni. I don't have time to process this. I had like 2 deadlines. So I literally in my head I felt, okay, I have these deadlines to focus on. So I didn't really tackle it when it happened. I remember just feeling like, oh, this happened. Cool. Let's move on. And then shortly after, there was the whole scandal about a couple of boys in a group chat that were saying racist things and discriminatory things. So that whole saga happened, and it didn't really trigger me. It was more, okay, it happened. A couple of people joked about it. Okay, cool. Life goes on. So in terms of being resentful, I wasn't resentful at all. I still am not. I'm not resentful. If anything, I think in processing what happened to me, it changed my perspective a lot. Definitely feel like it made me more understanding of the everyday struggles that Black people go through.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that interesting to say because I think as a Black person in the Western world and as a Black person coming from Africa, there's this expectation of Black people that grow up here that people from Africa would understand. The problem is in Africa, we're not necessarily like I never really identified as a Black person per se because there wasn't that difference. I was just Nigerian. So coming to the Western world, I was very much made aware of my Blackness. But the thing is, in my secondary school, the racism there wasn't, well, I didn't feel like it limited me. And so because of that, I put it to the back of my mind.
Mm.
So in my head, I felt, okay, cool. Some people may say dodgy things, but it's not limiting my progress. Like I said, I was able to rise to senior prefect, one of the most prestigious positions in the school. I was able to make it to the rugby team, basketball team, football team. So a lot of these, I think because I wasn't limited, I didn't pay attention to it. So when it came to a situation where my life was threatened, and then I processed it years later, that sort of gave me a new appreciation of the fact that I probably need to work twice as hard and appear almost perfect in order for these things to not happen to me. And I think it made me sad. It made me very, very sad because I'm already somewhat of a perfectionist in the sense that I try to be close to perfect in most things I do. So feeling that needs to be done in order to just get places in the world. Yeah, it was a sad realization. And I remember I was alone in my flat in London by myself and came to the realization, and I just felt really sad. I just felt, well, at least I've processed it emotionally, finally. 3 years later. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm resentful. No, I'm not resentful.
No. Yeah, no, that's good. And I think what it sounds like is, yeah, I feel like you have this like proper chilled way of just downplaying things. You're like, oh yeah, that just happened, and I sat down in my flat 3 years later and I processed it, and then I just got on with it. You know, I did another degree, wrote a book, and life carried on. But I think you do have a lot of you have developed a lot of resilience, and maybe a lot of it is like due to maybe even your upbringing, maybe even the part that we haven't talked about, like growing up in Nigeria, and because I feel like growing up in Africa is also very different. Of course, every home has its own challenges and things that you have to go through in your upbringing that can build you up. But I definitely think there's some unique challenges in growing up in a place like Africa, because I've experienced it, where things can be, really aggressive and maybe people not as patient as perhaps we're used to here in the UK, for example. But I think with that, it does build up a level of resilience. And then, kind of going back to that point of owning your story, I think there were some practical things that I picked up that you did. So definitely, even though it might have happened a little while later, but even taking that proactive step into going for therapy, there's a lot of men who, well, everyone knows, for men, that's a really big step to take, going and sitting down and like being really open with someone about what you're truly feeling, the things that you're afraid of, the things that worry you, the things that you're struggling to process. And I think that is a proactive step in owning your story, because that's the only way, you can start to come up with some realizations. And, it sounds like you were able to take away a couple of things. And I think the other thing that maybe we haven't talked about too much, but maybe we could talk a little bit now, is with the book. I don't know whether you knew it or not, but I feel like perhaps you writing your books, one book, but you've got another one coming out, right? So
Mm.
there's one, The Storm is out,
Yeah.
and you're right. What's the second one called?
Songs of the Prodigal Son.
Songs of the Prodigal Son. And
Yeah.
I will definitely put the links in the notes, because I'm sure there'll be people who are curious to find the books. But I feel like, for me, doing any kind of writing or any kind of, if you have any method of taking what's up here
Mm.
and putting it on a sheet of paper, or just getting it out of your body in some way, whether that's through writing. For me, actually, doing this podcast also acts like a bit of therapy. When I do those solo episodes, or even when I speak to guests like yourself, it helps me to process things that I've been thinking about. So yeah, so maybe this is a good point to kind of talk about the book. So with the storm, I know you touched on a lot of things around masculinity and I guess the male experience, and you wrote it in a pretty unique way because it was poetry based, I believe. And so as you were writing that book, like where were you, Ikenna, in your headspace? Were you still at a point of, identity, a crisis, quote unquote, or were these just topics that you were interested in and you just thought, I want to write a book, so let me start here?
Well, in hindsight, yeah, at the time, I remember thinking, yeah, I'm just writing a book. I hope it makes some sort of impact, but I'm just writing a book. In hindsight, I was in a, I was, I think in the first part, half of writing the book, but when I started, which was my second year of university, I was in a dark place, if I'm being honest, very dark place. I think it's always interesting because the people that know themselves, the people that think they know themselves the best, are often the ones that probably need therapy. And I found that to be the case in the sense, in the situation in my case, because I didn't need someone to tell me what I was feeling, because that was the same year that I was racially attacked. I didn't need someone to tell me what I was feeling. I didn't need someone to pull me through university stress and depression and stuff like that. I didn't need that. I knew what the source of these feelings were, this conflict, feeling lost and everything. I think I just felt like there was no way out. So writing for me was some form of therapy. I remember thinking, I'm going to write a book. I hadn't thought properly about it. It was something that was very impulsive. I think I remember showing some of my flatmates the poems I had written before, since I was around 15 years old. And I think someone made the side comment, Ikenna, you should write a book. And next week, I was like, I'm going to write a book.
Great idea. I'll do that next week.
I'll write a book. So, since I was young, I always did want to write a book. However, I think that person saying that, one of my best friends actually, and she said that, and I thought, sure, I'll write a book. So I compiled all the poems I'd written, wrote some more and everything. And I kid you not, there were some times I'd write and I would just break down in tears.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't sure why. I just knew that there was some cathartic experience, some purging of emotions going on. I just wasn't sure what was up. And so what the book did for me was give me a voice. I think I remember I opened up to a friend recently, and she said she used to think my life was all about the only struggles I really went through in life involved around my academics and always wanting to strive for my career ambitions. She didn't really realize that things like insecurity and stuff like that were things I really dealt with. Yeah. And I found that very interesting, because I always felt like I was this emotional wreck, because I've never really found it difficult per se to speak about my feelings. I just wouldn't do it for no reason, should I say. Like, I don't go around being like, okay, I'm speaking about my feelings. I deal with things by myself on my own terms. And then I normally sort of help people. Like, I'll be that guy that listens to you when you need someone to speak. Mm-hmm. However, I might not speak much about things I'm going through. Mm-hmm. And I just got used to that way of living life. Like, I spoke to people every now and then, like my really close friends, but even at that, I never really gave them the whole story, the whole picture, because I either didn't want them to worry, I didn't want them to want to be a burden on them, and I also just a private person, as it happens to be. Yeah. So it wasn't so much as I found it difficult to be vulnerable and open up to people per se. It was just more of, I just didn't really see a need. Mm-hmm. And so what writing that book did for me was, like I said, it gave me a voice, because I can articulate myself in the best possible way when I'm writing. Mm. So, I mean, people have said to me that, I come across as an articulate speaker, and I'm like, well, do I though? Because I just feel like when I speak about my emotions, I get very tongue-tied. So I think writing is often the best way for me to get whatever I'm feeling through. And so the themes I explore in the book are things like domestic violence, just the fragility of being male, the ego, just themes that I had sort of come across in life back then. And sometimes I laugh now when I think about the book, because in my head I'm like, who did you think you were? Like you were 20 years old.
10 years old, telling people how to live their lives.
Exactly. Like I remember thinking back, and I started writing at 19, and I turned 20 and I published the book, self-published it. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, yeah, this is all nice and everything. But when I look back in hindsight, what I know now, what I knew then, I'm like, wow, bro, you really didn't know anything, but cool. Anyways. But I think I just wanted to help another young guy out there understand that whatever they are going through that they can't speak about, it's going to be fine. And it's interesting because I was saying that, but I don't necessarily think I was living it. So I was in this dark place trying to purge myself to help other people, but I wasn't necessarily helping myself. Obviously that's all changed now. Thank God. But yeah, that was mainly the message from the book. Just sort of say to young men, young people, but especially young boys, that whatever you're going through, it'll be fine. You'll be fine. Like it will all get better in the end. Just, I couldn't really say keep the faith, because I wasn't sure how much faith I had in God around the time. But I just sort of just believed that I held on to this small glimmer of hope that, yeah, things will be fine. Because I think a lot of my past had a lot to do with it, because I massively insecure about my intellect, and obviously coming from Nigeria, not really feeling like I had a future ahead of me and stuff like that. So I think a lot of that formed my deep, darkest insecurities and deep, darkest sort of things I had to grapple with. So yeah, it was an interesting, so when I say my university experience was more of an identity crisis, it wasn't just about being Black or not, or being African or not. It's more about, who am I? Because I felt like I had, don't get me wrong, like I think my parents are decently proud of me. So I think I'd always tried to be this model child, perfect, this sort of, because in my head I thought if I couldn't make up for it in intellect, at least I could make up for it somewhere else. So I'd always tried to be a stickler for the rules, essentially do everything I meant to do. In first year, I used to attend loads of law firm events because I wanted to get a job in like first year and then graduate with a job and stuff like that. So I was tried to be a model child. The problem with that is I felt like I wasn't getting that right either. So it was a lot of, yeah. So when I say identity crisis, it was just coming to terms with really who I was as a person, because I felt like there was this expectation, because I'm the firstborn in my family. So expectation to not mess up in life. So your siblings can look at you and sort of aspire to be better or something like that. Then there was what my parents expected me to do. Then just all these expectations, basically what I expected of myself. And so I just felt like I needed to understand, who really am I? And yeah, I think writing the book sort of, should I say, yeah, it helped it. I think it helped that, and also hopefully helped to impact some people.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, and I think as you speak, and maybe it's something that you just touched on now as you were finishing that last point, when you said, maybe it's something connected with being the firstborn, which is something that you kind of said it, in passing, but maybe, obviously I don't know for sure, but maybe maybe it had more of a profound experience on you than you may have realized, because there's almost like a, from my observation in this, very short conversation that we've had, there's almost like a theme of like responsibility, like responsibility is a big part of, I guess, your identity, and not responsibility in the sense of, oh, Mr. Responsible or model child necessarily, but also a responsibility to give back in some way. Because I can tell you for sure that when I was 21, 22, writing a book to help young boys, you know, process things that they're going through as teenagers was not high on my priority list. I was out there. I was out there having
Yeah.
fun. But I think for you, and we kind of joked about it earlier at the start, you've got this, you take this almost like bird's eye view on life, which is unique for someone your age. Like earlier, I was joking that you speak like you're 85 years old, looking back on like this big life that you've had when actually you're only in your early 20s. So, but I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing because it's put you in a position to give back so much so soon. So I can only think where you're going to be, in 10, 20 years time, how many books you'll have written, how
Hopefully.
many stages you'll have spoken on, how many people you'll have helped. And hopefully this is an encouragement as well for people listening to this, because a lot of people use the age thing as an excuse, either I'm too young or I'm too old. But I think what you've demonstrated here so clearly is that it's not even about the age or that the amount of experience. It's if you've got something of value to offer that could help someone, then it is worth using your platform to share that knowledge, because you don't know who's being impacted on it, right now. Even right now, it's probably someone looking up your book or someone reading your book right now, and who may be in that position of identity crisis, who may have experienced, some of the things that you've experienced or similar. And they are so, so thankful that you wrote that book and didn't go out clubbing like Winston was doing 10 years ago.
Oh, I actually went out clubbing, all right, but I got a bit bored of it after a while.
Well, you're just better at time management than me. I couldn't do the clubbing and write the book for sure. And kind of as we begin to wrap up, I guess, and by the way, this has been pretty, pretty cool. Like, I've learned so much. I feel like we've spoken a lot about entrepreneurship and like things that we used to talk about in the mastermind around business. But I feel like this is the first like one-to-one conversation that we've had like on a more personal level. So thank you for being so open with your story. And so maybe to wrap up, like, so what is next for you? Because and I guess maybe it feels like you've almost, another thing that I've noticed is it feels like you've almost come full circle from going from that place where you had the identity questions to being racially abused. But at the same time, you've written books to help people process things around identity. And I know you've done some work in the BAME community as well. So it feels like you've kind of gone all the way around the circle. And so, yeah, I'm just curious, what is next for you, and, what things have you got coming up? What projects? I know we were talking about BAME Nation last year. How's that going? And what else is happening, really?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that you say full circle because I almost feel like my life has changed so much so quickly in like the past 2 to 3 years. Um, just because I think my mentality has changed as well. So I think when I come from a place of wanting to help young boys especially is say that because I think my motivation with that is wanting to be the big brother I wish I had
Mm,
and wanting to be the older older male role model I also wish I had. Because when I look back at my teenage years, I feel like I wasted a lot of time being insecure. Because now like I think I wasted a lot of time caring about things that just don't really matter today. So how I look, how intelligent I am, and things like that. So these big insecurities, especially intellect, I think intellect had always been a massive insecurity for me. So in class, I'm always worried about how I'm coming across to people and stuff like that. And you know, graduating uni, I think I felt to myself, you know what, like none of this matters. And you can always acquire intellect through just reading books, reading things. It's not something that you're just born with. I think that's the thing. From my background, I felt like you're either born smart or you're not. And I didn't feel like, and I had always been told that I wasn't born smart. And so I internalized this. And so grew up truly believing that I would never be smart. So it became almost a thorn in my side, like this big elephant in the room, always there haunting me. And so I think I sort of broke out from that sort of mental enslavery, if should I say, and I say that enslavement, sorry, and I say that because when I started to do things like write a book and, like you said, found the social initiative, BAME Nation, I started to realize within myself that just what people think just doesn't matter. Like at the end of the day, everyone has something to be insecure about, but it's about the people that are able to push past the fear. The successful people are the people that are able to push past the fear and just get on with it and achieve their goals. And I think that was the mindset shift. And you say I've come full circle, and I actually, interestingly enough, I agree. And I think at this point in my life, I'm building, and I'm trying to build a steady foundation that my 30-plus-year-old self will be proud of. And so that's essentially what I would say is next. I'm reading as much as possible. I'm trying to understand business more. I'm trying to understand what my career ambitions are, and I'm essentially trying to build a foundation for myself for when I'm in my 30s and when I'm in my 40s, and I'm trying to utilize my 20s to the very best ability, essentially, to my very best ability. And yeah, you touched on BAME Nation. Yeah, it's essentially a social initiative I co-founded because I felt like a lot of law students didn't understand the importance of business in the legal industry. And so I, through writing blogs and hosting webinars, wanted to bring BAME students and international students to one place to essentially build their network and also learn about just basically commercial news. At the moment, we are undergoing a rebranding, hence why we haven't been live for a while now. So we're rebranding to a different name, sort of, and so that will be hopefully around March. Be ready to go. But in terms of next steps, yeah, like I said before, it's mainly about just building a very secure foundation for myself that a 30-year-old self and 40-year-old self will be proud of and thankful for. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. And again, you've got this like super long-term thinking, which is, I think, really rare for someone your age. And, definitely with BAME Nation, keep me in the loop with what's going on with that, because that's tied into maybe some of the work that I do in the diversity and inclusion space, which is around, I know your social initiative is very specific to the law industry, but I also have an interest in representation across all sectors, whether it's law, tech, finance, whatever. And so I'm sure there's a lot of shared learning that could happen, and maybe we could even do a collab at some point and see if we can help people understand more about getting into these corporate institutions and some of the barriers that are there to be overcome, and maybe invite them into our communities, so to speak. So definitely keep in the loop, and definitely I'll be sharing all your links, all
Yeah.
your social media links in the show notes, because there's just been so much good stuff that we've touched on today. We've talked about, your background, growing up in the diaspora. We've talked about race. We've talked about identity, masculinity. We've it pretty much touched on some pretty big topics. So this is actually one of those episodes that I encourage people to listen to at least a couple of times because there's going to be different things that come up for you each time you listen to it. So, Ikenna, this has been such a huge pleasure for me. And to be honest, it still feels like we've only scratched the surface of the full conversation. So maybe at some point I'll have you back. But honestly, I thank you so much for just taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Winston. It's been a pleasure. I started off a bit nervous, but then I just eased into it and thought, you know what, just tell your story. And so yeah, thank you so much. I really do hope someone out there is able to learn from what I've said, what you said from our conversation, basically. Because I don't even believe I know much yet. But I'm growing.
Always underplaying yourself. Drop all these gems on the podcast. And you're like, yeah, that was nothing. Nah, for sure. I'm sure people had a lot to take away. And yeah, like I said, this is one of those I'm sure people will be listening to. And so yeah, let's see. Maybe have you back at some point.
Yeah, thanks, Winston. Bye.
No worries. Thank you, Ikenna. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. And by the way, if you're listening on Spotify, Apple, or some other kind of app and you got some value from today's episode, then I'd absolutely love if you could drop me a quick review. Until next time.